Welcome back to Storytime. In today's episode, we're going to be continuing our reading of Machines and Men. But before we jump into it, hit that like button if you enjoy our content, and also feel free to subscribe if you want to continue to be a Creant with us. And you should also check out our community at Reddit at r/CreantWorld if you enjoy this story, and if you want to submit one for yourself, you can do that there as well. And now, Machines and Men, Chapter 8, In the Eyes of God. Stephen awoke early the next morning. It had been 2.5 years since he moved to San Diego. Plenty of time to adjust to his new sleep schedule. These days, even on weekends, he found it difficult to sleep later than 9:30, where previously on a Sunday he would have been lucky to get up before 3 in the afternoon. Stephen stretched luxuriously and looked over to Vera. Her eyes were closed, and she was breathing regularly. She looked asleep, but he knew she wasn't. Robots didn't need to sleep. She was only in an inactive mode. She was still so lovely lying there that rather than getting up, he snuggled up against her again. Screw coffee. The best part of waking up was having someone to wake up to. He stayed that way for a long while, his left arm under her neck, his right arm draped across her, hugging under her breasts. It was a wonderful notion that he could wake up to her every morning like this. Stephen reveled in the sheer joy of having someone to cuddle with for about 20 minutes, listening to the rhythmic sound of Vera's mechanical breathing, watching her bare shoulder rise and fall before his eyes. But Stephen was not a robot, and already his arm was starting to fall asleep from the surprising weight of Vera's head. He bore it as long as he could, and finally gave Vera a little shake to wake her up. "Good morning," she said, brushing the hair from her eyes. "Did you sleep well?" "How could I not, with someone as beautiful as you to cuddle up with?" Stephen said with a smile, giving her a quick kiss on the forehead. "But," he continued with a more businesslike tone, "I'm afraid it's time to get up. I can't sleep half the day away, no matter how much I'd like to. I'm going to grab a shower, and then I'll get breakfast going." "Shower?" Vera repeated, biting her lip uncertainly. Stephen laughed and threw the covers off them before pulling Vera to her feet. "Come on, babe, I'll show you how," he said on a laugh. Many people believe that a shower is sexy, and although it might be to an observer, when you put two people of different height in close confined space, it usually is anything but sexy. Stephen quickly abandoned any thoughts he may have harbored of getting frisky with Vera in the shower. For a start, Stephen's bathroom was, like the rest of his rental property, fairly small, so just maneuvering around each other was tricky. Secondly, he had to teach Vera how to properly wash herself. There wasn't much flirtatious advances. Instead, he washed her back for her and helped her get the lather out of her hair. There was something very nice about this simple gesture. When they were done, Stephen tousled Vera's hair with a towel. Then the two withdrew into the bedroom to get changed. Stephen selected a very cute tank top and a pair of jeans while Vera watched. Stephen loved the feel of her warm, just out of the shower skin as he handed Vera her clothes. He watched her dress. He loved watching Vera do just about anything. There was a sort of pleasant innocence around her which he found very appealing. Stephen patted down the stairs with Vera in tow and began making himself breakfast. Vera helped him in a limited degree, clearly watching him as he worked. Vera sat opposite him at the breakfast table and watched him with a warm smile as Stephen ate. He had to admit, having Vera sit across from him was nice, but it was a bit off-putting that she didn't eat. Once again, he thought about what Dan had told him at Blue Fairy. Not doing basic things like eating was making the differences more obvious. He still loved looking at her, but the fact that all she had for breakfast was a single glass of water was fairly disturbing. "I've got to run some errands today, Vera," Stephen said as he washed up the dishes. "Would you mind staying here for a while? I could put on some TV for you, or you could play some games if you want." "Okay," Vera replied without hesitation. "I can use that time to watch some tutorial videos. Is there anything in particular I should focus on?" "Sure. I'll write you up a list of stuff to look into. Take your time working through the list, by the way. Feel free to explore them as much as you want. There's no preferences." The list written, and Vera ensconced on the couch in front of the smart TV, Stephen headed out on his errand run. He felt a passing pang of guilt about leaving Vera alone, but he knew he would have to move beyond that, at least for now. Vera had to learn. Walking down the street towards the grocery store, Stephen noticed, as he had done increasingly in the past few months, about the number of robots that were around him. Perhaps it was because of Vera, and perhaps not. But most especially, he was noticing more and more humanoid robots. Most of the models on the market weren't as difficult to differentiate from humans as the dolls were, and he began to notice them everywhere. He passed one, a woman who looked like a 12-year-old's bimbo wet dream, walking a tiny poodle. Another robot, a human-shaped mannequin-looking affair, was gently pushing two girls at once on the swing set. Stephen was pleased to see so many people interacting with robots. It just seemed so natural. The history of people and robots had been a somewhat bumpy one. It seemed that even though humans reveled in their ability to create more and more human-like robots, they also feared and even hated them. In the late 20th century, people had hated robots because they were poised to take the jobs of millions of workers. But as time had passed, it became apparent that the robots were not going to replace mankind, but were rather freeing them. Now, you didn't have to do physical labor unless you wanted to. Humans were free to focus on more creative jobs, on more entertaining technology. The robots did the tasks the humans didn't want to do, shouldering the burden of cleaning up the human messes, sometimes literally, without complaint. This, of course, had led to the next biggest fear humans had of robots, that they would someday take over the world and kill off their human masters. Time, again, had proven the falseness of this assumption. Humans were afraid of a robot uprising because it is what they themselves would have done. But the robot didn't know anger, vengeance, or loathing. Robots were legitimately happy to help humans in any way they could. Vera was, to Stephen's mind, the perfect proof of this. So far, whenever he had asked a favor of her, she had been ready and genuinely willing to help out. And so it seemed for most robots. Humans had feared AI would run out of control, and it might have if the programmers had not put limits on them. This was one job that robots would never be allowed to do. Only a human could make and program robots. Oh, sure, they had automation during the construction process, but it was always low or no AI. The actual process of programming the robot's positronic net was done exclusively by humans and always would be. The truth of the situation was that even though robots could learn substantially faster and more efficiently than people, it was the people who decided what the robots learned. Here again, Stephen reflected on Vera. If he hadn't provided her with a list of things he would like her to learn, she likely wouldn't have taken the initiative to learn anything. It made him wonder if, given no direction, a robot would simply not do anything. Stephen knew that robots all received basic programming from the factory, which allowed them to speak and move. But what about the ability to choose? At the mall, if he hadn't picked out Vera's outfits, would she have been able to make up her own mind eventually? Stephen didn't think so. And therein was the third fear of robots. If a robot could choose, its choices would be made purely based on its programming and nothing else. Emotions, whim, chance played no part on how robots made decisions. Their positronic brains worked as computers with logical precision. A robot could, theoretically, decide on a course of action and ignore all arguments to the contrary. In 2001, A Space Odyssey, it wasn't that HAL 9000 was evil. It was simply trying to complete its mission. But it was the fact that Hal didn't care about anything but completing the mission that made him frightening. But that was where the Asimov laws came into play. A robot could do no harm to a human being either directly or indirectly, and always putting humans first meant that the mission would always be second. But those were all fears from the past. Nowadays, people feared robots for a different reason. There were many who claimed, not without good reason, as Stephen himself could attest, that robots made perfect mates. That robots made to be perfect were the obvious choice for humans. Many people believed that dating an artificial mate spelled the doom of society, not because the robot would hurt the person they were with, but because no real human mate could ever possibly compete. How could they? Robots like Vera were designed to be the ideal mate. Literally everything people like Stephen could have ever dreamed of. How could ordinary human men and women compete with that? And with more people dating robots, there would be less human reproduction. And in the end, that was what really scared people now. The humanity would go out not in some Terminator-style Judgment Day, but rather with their dicks in silicone, as one YouTuber had put it. Stephen was lost in thought and almost didn't notice the large group of people gathered up on one of the side streets. The crowd all seemed to be gathered around a makeshift stage, bedecked in theatrical lighting. Several camera crews were gathered around the stage, their cameras pointing up at a red-faced, sweaty man in a white suit who was pontificating loudly.
"We say to you, no! We shall not be swayed by the devil's machinations. God made us the master of the beasts and the plants. Are we not also the masters of machines as well? God gave us a soul, something which no machine can ever have. Why should we, the children of God, bow to the soulless and the unloving? The robot is simply nothing more than a machine. Should we give a toaster rights? No! These soulless machines shall not corrupt the righteous. They seek to draw us down to the soullessness of their corruption. Well, we say no! We, the righteous, shall rise on high to heaven, and it begins now, my friends. It begins now. I urge you to vote no on Bill 110-B. Robots are machines in the dominion of men, soulless machines and nothing more. They are not human and cannot be treated as our equal,"
he said, gesturing wildly as he strode back and forth on the stage. Stephen moved forward and looked at the pastor in a sort of awe at the vehemence of this guy. He knew that there were quite a lot of people that felt strongly about this issue, but he hadn't realized that it had gone quite this far. Humans were strange creatures. Anything they didn't understand or that didn't jive with their ideas of normality was immediately labeled as evil. Stephen caught sight of Meg, the plump, quiet woman from his office, and made his way over to her. Meg worked in a different department, but he had noticed her from a distance a few times. She had attracted his attention because she was one of the few people that was close to his own age in the building. She was not, by any means, a glamorous woman. In fact, she was rather plain, brown hair piled up on her head in an untidy bun, thick-rimmed square glasses on her nose, and a propensity to wear somewhat baggy clothes that always made her look a little frumpy. Still, she seemed friendly enough, though perhaps a little shy. Stephen had talked to her a couple of times, and had always smiled and said hello whenever they passed each other in the halls. But being on friendly terms didn't make them friends, and Stephen was hard-pressed to recall anything that he actually knew about her. "Hey, Meg," he said loudly so he could be heard over the crowd. "What's going on here?"
"Pastor Ryan Phelps is telling us about how all robots are evil,"
Meg said with a grimace.
"I'm not sure I'm buying it. They didn't have robots in Bible days. Listen, can we go somewhere else to talk? I can barely hear you."
"So what's he banging on about?" Stephen asked when they were clear of the crowd.
"It's his opinion that God hates robots and that robots are the devil's agents on earth leading us into sin,"
Meg said, blowing out a sigh.
"But the Bible doesn't mention robots because they didn't exist then. So I'm not sure I'm buying it. The Bible tells us to own our possessions but not let them own us, but I don't think it means it literally. So far as I remember, the only machines that appeared in the Bible were the siege engines and ballista and that sort of thing, made by cunning men."
Stephen slid her a sideways glance. "I take it you're a Christian?" he asked. Meg shrugged.
"Yes and no. I was raised Christian. I still go to church and believe in God, but I'm more inclined to take the Bible as a metaphor than hard and fast rules. I mean, have you ever read the Bible all the way through? Technically, men aren't allowed to shave, and women must never let someone see them while they're menstruating. It doesn't exactly translate to the modern world, you know," she said, and then looked at Stephen questioningly. "Why?"
"No reason," Stephen replied. "I was just curious as to what you think about robots."
"Possess things, but don't let them possess you, I guess. I don't know. They're machines. They don't have feelings. They're not human, so they aren't subject to human standards. They're not alive. They're just simulate life. But how can you say that they are agents of the devil when we are the ones that made them? I don't know. It just seems a little over the top to me."
The two walked in silence for a while, and Stephen suddenly asked, "What about having sex with robots?"
"I prefer humans,"
Meg said with a half smile. "No, I mean, what does God think about having sex with robots?" he persisted.
"Well, like I said, there isn't any literature on the subject. Sex toys didn't exist in those days either. The Bible talks a lot about adultery and about how that's a sin, but to me, adultery is when you cheat on your wife or your girlfriend with someone else.
If you were dating a robot, it wouldn't be adultery per se, but it's not something I would do. It's my opinion that the purpose of living things is to ensure that their species survive and thrive. And how can you do that if you're dating a robot? Besides, I'd like to have kids someday, and that's not something a robot can ever do for you. So dating a robot is just pleasure. There's nothing really to be gained from it. Stephen thought about this for a moment. She did make a good point. Wasn't it the job of living things to provide for the next generation? Wasn't the whole purpose of living to ensure that living should continue? No matter how he felt towards Vera, it didn't change the fact that she was not a woman. She was a robot, a machine, and he was a human being. They were separate, different, and nothing was going to change that. Meg, it turned out, was also headed to the grocery store, so Stephen fell into conversation with her as they walked. She had raised an eyebrow at his questions about robots, but had never commented on them. Once Stephen got her talking, he found that it was easy to have a conversation with Meg, who actually seemed to share many of the same ideas about matters of spirituality as he had. She was a Christian, she told him, but she embraced the ideas of tolerance and love. And just because someone had a different belief than her didn't mean they were going to hell. Well, firstly, Meg said in response to Stephen's questioning, I don't believe that God is some big white guy in the sky with a beard and a robe. I believe that God is nothing more or less than the unknowable force that makes the universe the way it is rather than the way it could be. Like, think about causality. Dominoes knocking over other dominoes and so on and so on. Everything we do, think, or say is in response to something that someone else has already done. Cause and effect. We don't know what the effect of our actions are going to be down the line, but everything you do and everything you don't do will have effects stretching into the future. So you're saying that God was the hand that started the dominoes falling, the initial cause for all the effects down the line? Stephen asked, trying to follow her logic. Not exactly, Meg continued. I believe that God was the one that set up the dominoes to be knocked down. Think about how unlikely it is that we should even be talking right now. I mean that in all of San Diego, two people who know each other should happen to randomly meet on the street. The odds against the two of us being in the same place at the same time, and that you should notice me in a crowd of hundreds of people, are astronomical. And yet, here we are. Could have easily fallen out otherwise, but it didn't, even though that outcome was way more likely. To me, that can't just be chance. There is a power that guides us along the road of unpredictable reality, which makes things the way they are rather than the way they could be. That, to me, is God. Stephen couldn't really argue with this. He had never really thought about God in that way before. He, like many young Americans, was dissatisfied with the dogmatic and archaic practices of major organized religions. But when you came right down to it, all religion was a system of values structured around core beliefs. Meg's version of Christianity, which didn't focus on deification or dogma, was refreshing. Stephen had never realized, or maybe had never taken time to notice, that Meg was far deeper than she appeared on the surface. That behind those dorky glasses was a very intelligent and inquisitive mind. As they talked, and he got to know her, Stephen began warming to Meg. Her intelligence and dry sense of humor intrigued him, and he resolved to get to know her better in future, to make more of an effort to scratch the surface of this bland facade. Meg, who had only come out for cat food, milk, and bread, took her leave of Stephen in the dairy aisle, though not before exchanging Facebook contacts. I don't really check it very often, she said apologetically, but from time to time I post some current philosophy problems up that I found online. When she was gone, Stephen returned to his shopping, his mind full of a whirl of thoughts. He thought about Vera. He thought about how Vera made him feel. He thought about the idea of God as a guiding force. He thought if robots had souls, and, somewhat to his surprise, a tiny portion of his mind also thought about Meg, and thought about how intriguing she had been. It was all very confusing, and Stephen couldn't get it all sorted out in his head. He pondered everything that he and Meg had discussed all the way home. Certainly, it had been a very interesting day. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed that episode, feel free to hit that like button. And if you really liked it, go ahead and subscribe so that you can stay with us and be a Creant. You can also join the Creant community by following us on Reddit and Twitter. Links in the description. Until next time, we'll see you later.